state of California, so we're part of the government. We're the primary energy planning agency for the state of California, and one of our key responsibilities is in EV charging. So we do a lot of policy analysis, reporting analysis on EV charging, like how many chargers do we need at a certain year. But importantly, we're also one of the largest funders of EV charging. So between this fiscal year, so since last June and 2028, we're actually deploying over $1 billion towards zero-emission vehicle refueling. So we have a lot of money to play with, and we have to be judicious about how we spend that money, and that's where a lot of today's presentation comes from. When we think about EV charging, there are sort of three guiding principles that we keep in mind. The first is that charging needs to be accessible and needs to be reliable. When we do our charging infrastructure analysis for the state of California, we're actually estimating that we need about 1 million public and shared chargers in California in 2030 to support all the charging demand. And so we need to build that out, partly through our funding, but also a lot of private funding as well. So that's about making sure that charging is accessible to Californians throughout the state. Of course, that charging also needs to be reliable. Once the charger exists, it needs to work as well. And later, my colleague Dustin will go deeper into what we're doing on the reliability front. Once you have an accessible and reliable charger, it needs to be easy to use. Like once you drive up there, you have to be able to easily start the session, easily pay for the session, and of course you need that to be interoperable. It needs to be working with your car or your payment network, whatever you're trying to use. And finally, one that a lot of customers don't really think about and that we don't want them to think about too much, it's more our job, is to make sure that EV charging is grid friendly. As California and a lot of the rest of the world electrifies transportation, space conditioning, water heating, and so forth, there's going to be a huge ramp up in terms of electricity demand. And we need to be able to figure out how to accommodate all that while still controlling costs for both the customer and also other electricity ratepayers. Going into a bit more about this, about a year ago, our agency published what we call the interoperability statement. So that's the link in that first bullet there. And in that, we outlined a vision of something that we call broad interoperability. And this is a future where any driver with any EV can go and easily charge on any charging network, regardless of that charger on that charging network. In that interoperability statement, we laid out the sort of EV charging ecosystem, so the CSOs, the EMPs, the driver, charger manufacturers, and so forth. And we outlined all the distinct connections that are made between all these different entities and what we need to do to get to that broad interoperability future. So you can download that at your own leisure and read if you'd like to. Going back to that point earlier about grid friendly, it's important that EV charging is grid friendly because of savings both to the driver and to the electricity system. California already has reasonably high electricity rates, and we need to control that so that our goals for electrification and decarbonization can be met in the state. So to achieve all of this, accessible, reliable charging, stuff that's user-friendly and interoperable and also grid-friendly, the baseline for that is standardized and common protocols, and that's where things like Open Charge Point Protocol and ISO 15118 come in. These are the ways that we can ensure that charging is interoperable and that we can scale a really good and smart charging experience. Folks sometimes compare charging to refueling with gas, and we think it not only needs to be as easy as refueling with gas, but way easier and way smarter, because we ultimately have the ability to do that because chargers and vehicles are both digital devices. So to that end, we as CEC, a big charging infrastructure funder, do levy a lot of requirements in our own funding projects to support that better and smarter charging experience. On the screen, I've pulled up our most frequently used requirements. We technically set our requirements on a project-by-project basis, but if you basically comply with this, then you're probably good to go for all of our charging projects. First, we can talk a bit about the connector. This is North America, so we still have some passenger EV connector negotiation going on, but it's basically boiled down to J1772. That's the standard AC and CCS plug, and also J3400, that's NACS. Today, we require that chargers meet one of these two connector types, and eventually we want to move to a one connector future for passenger EV charging in North America. So we've targeted a full transition to J3400 NACS in 2027. That's going to be dependent a lot on when automakers actually deliver vehicles with native NACS inlets, and of course when EVSE manufacturers do that the same. There's a link to our statement on NACS there, which goes into some of our reasoning and some of the more details behind that, that decision. Beyond the connector, there's all that communication that I talked about earlier. So one thing that we do require is that chargers we fund, regardless of whether it's AC or DC charging, needs to be ISO 15118 capable. So it needs to have that PLC modem on board. You need to be ready to be able to load software onto that charger so that you can start running ISO 15118 use cases. The most obvious immediate near-term benefit to this is to implement plug and charge. That's a user experience benefit. But of course, long-term, the ability to exchange things like energy needed, departure time through 15118, that'll be important for grid integration and grid-friendly charging as well. Of course, we're at an OCPP event. We do require our chargers to be OCPP certified as well. So as of this month, in our largest projects, we require chargers to be OCPP 201 or later certified. So that's through the OCA certification program and then through a lab. The last two are not requirements that we have necessarily levied as our own agency, but ones that are put into California law. So if you're deploying a charger that is a paid charger, so you have to pay some money in order to use it, you need to be what we call type approved or CTEP, NTEP approved. That's a metering check to make sure that you are accurately measuring the amount of energy and then charging accurately based on that measurement. Also, if you're a paid charger, you need to offer a contactless card reader on that charger so that folks can pay with the cards that are already in their wallet. And finally, if you're a public DC charger, you need to offer ISO 15118 plug-in charge. So not just be 15118 capable like the second bullet, but fully implemented plug-in charge so that users can easily pay and start for charging. That last slide was about the requirements today, and we are moving forward with potentially other requirements as well. So last year, the state legislature passed some bills that actually gave our agency more regulatory authority over new areas in EV charging. The first one was a bill called AB 2697, but basically this bill gives the CEC authority to regulate EV charging network roaming. One of the key complaints that we hear from normal users of EV charging is that they don't like having to carry around many different apps to be able to start charging on many different networks. Part of that is going to be mitigated through some of those payment method requirements that I talked about, such as credit cards, so you could pay with a credit card. But of course, you could potentially have a much more seamless experience if you could do plug and charge and use whatever mobility provider you want to use. And of course, network roaming is a key part of that. So this is an area we're going to explore this year. We could potentially, for example, require major charging station operators in the state to accept payment from like a minimum number of other EMSPs, as an example. A different bill that was passed is Senate Bill 59, and this gives us the authority to require that vehicle classes are bidirectional capable. One of the first things we have to do is to assess which vehicle classes it makes sense to require bidirectional charging. So where would bidirectional charging result in benefits to both the driver, but also the electricity system? And for those particular vehicle classes, we can then start a rulemaking process to require them to be bidirectional capable in order to be sold in California. Both of these are areas that we're going to be looking into in 2025, so there's no current regulatory proposal, but to the extent that you have any ideas or things that you don't want us to do, you can let me know about that. Of course, any regulations that we develop, that's subject to a very public process, so we'd have to let you know what our thinking is. We'd have opportunities for you to provide formal feedback so that you can help shape those regulations as well. So that's what's coming up. That's most of what I have for you today. Before you all go, just wanted to point out a couple things. So as I mentioned, we have over $1 billion in funding going out towards zero-emission vehicle refueling over the next few years. We have rebates for AC chargers. We have rebates for DC chargers. We also have a separate rebate program for medium and heavy-duty chargers. There are links to each of those there. Those are ways that you can get state funding for chargers that you're installing or that you're producing for installers to install at customer sites. In order to participate in those rebate programs, make sure that you enroll either your network or your charging equipment into those programs. So you have to make sure you meet all the technical requirements, and once you do, you enroll, you get onto the list. Links to those lists and enrollment are in that second bullet. If you don't want to go through our rebate programs and you want to apply to some more specific and unique grant funding opportunities, we do roll those out on a regular basis. So there's a link to a list of all of our current funding opportunities, and also we have new ones that are posted every so often as well. If you're a manufacturer of bidirectional charging equipment, bidirectional charging equipment has to go through a process called utility interconnection. And to make that process go faster, we encourage you to list with our V2G equipment list. This helps utilities. It's a reference for utilities. They can look at that list and check whether or not your equipment is already safety certified and meets all the requirements for interconnection in California. And finally, you could just click on all these links and read and try to remember things, but if you want to just stay in touch through email, we do have a listserv service as well, and there's a link to subscribe there. If you have any other questions, you can talk to me afterward or email me as well. That's all I have. Any questions that I can take right now?
So can you go back to the 15118 slide? These two, yeah, there you go. In your requirement, what is the qualification for meeting that requirement?
Good question. So today our ISO 15118 capable or ISO 15118 ready requirement is self-attested. So you as the manufacturer, when you enroll your equipment into one of those programs, or when you apply to our grant, you would have to essentially sign a form saying, yes, we do have the PLC modem on board, and we meet your definition for ISO 15118 ready. That full definition is outlined in that in a document that's linked there called the recommendation. Moving forward, as Charin and other entities develop ISO 15118 conformance test cases, and as testing capacity grows for ISO 15118 conformance, we'll definitely consider whether or not that's a more appropriate check of that capability. Obviously, that's a more stringent but verifiable way of checking for that ISO 15118 capability over just a self-attestation.
About the ISO 15118 plug and charge, which PKI should I have to use to?
Currently, the requirement is just that you need to be 15118 plug and charge like implemented. We don't say which particular PKI you have to use to do that.
Just UX?
What's that? Any other questions? All right, thanks everybody.
Yeah, thanks.